Marizel Cordero thought she was flying to Singapore for love. Instead, her name would be whispered in one of Southeast Asia's most disturbing organ trafficking investigations. Marizel Cordero had lived most of her life in Davao City, surrounded by familiar faces and predictable routines. She worked long shifts at a small hotel near the city center, often watching tourists come and go with stories of adventure, romance, and opportunity. Sometimes, as she handed room keys to guests headed out to explore new places, she wondered if she would ever experience something extraordinary herself. Her life was safe, steady, and ordinary, but deep inside she carried a quiet longing for something more, a chance to feel chosen, valued, and understood. That sense of longing made her vulnerable to the attention of Leonhart Vale, a man who entered her life through a social app one evening when she was too tired to sleep and too restless to stay bored. His profile described him as a Filipino-Singaporean entrepreneur who split his time between two countries, running tech businesses and investing in small companies. His photo showed a calm face, well-dressed and confident, yet not intimidating. What caught her attention most was the way he wrote, measured, gentle, and patient. He never pushed for anything and always asked about her day as if it genuinely mattered to him. For the first time in years, Marizel felt seen. Over the next few months, Leonhart became part of her daily routine. He sent her messages in the morning, checking whether she had eaten. He sent her articles about Singapore's culture and short video clips of places he said he would take her someday. When she complained about long hours at work, he hinted at a different life, a life where she would not have to work so hard, where someone would care for her, where she would wake up every morning feeling safe and appreciated. His words had a way of slipping into her thoughts long after she put down her phone. Her friends noticed the change. She smiled more, she checked her phone constantly. She began imagining a future she had never considered before, a future outside the Philippines. She told herself she was being careful, but deep down she knew she was already emotionally invested. Each time she tried to slow down, Leonhart responded with something thoughtful that made her doubts shrink. As the weeks passed, he began suggesting that they should meet in person. At first she hesitated. Traveling to another country alone felt risky, and she did not want to appear desperate. But Leonhart handled her hesitation effortlessly. He explained that Singapore was one of the safest countries in the world, that he would meet her at the airport, and that she could stay in a hotel he personally trusted. He even offered to pay for her ticket, but she refused, wanting to preserve her dignity and independence. Eventually, she agreed, telling herself she was being brave rather than reckless. Preparing for the trip became an emotional experience. She bought a new suitcase, packed clothes that made her feel confident, and printed every travel document twice. She watched videos about Singapore's streets, malls, and famous food spots, imagining herself walking beside Leonhart. Her mother worried quietly, but did not stop her, choosing instead to trust her daughter's judgment. Her coworkers teased her affectionately, calling her Singapore girl. Their excitement boosted her confidence, making her believe she was stepping into something beautiful. On the day of her flight, Marizel arrived at the airport hours early. Her hands trembled as she checked in, passed through immigration, and found her seat on the plane. When the plane took off, she felt her heart lift, not just from leaving the ground, but from the promise of a new chapter. She pictured meeting Leonhart, imagined him smiling, and wondered what it would feel like to finally stand next to someone who had already become so important to her. When she landed at Changi Airport, everything felt surreal. The air smelled different. The floors shined like glass. Travelers hurried past with expensive luggage and confident steps. She spotted Leonhart in the arrival area holding a small bouquet of flowers. He looked exactly like his photos, calm, composed, and welcoming. She felt a rush of relief, the kind that comes when hopes meet reality without disappointment. Leonhart greeted her with a polite warmth that immediately put her at ease. He insisted on carrying her luggage and guided her to his car parked in the pickup zone. The interior smelled of leather and faint cologne. As they drove out of the airport, he pointed out landmarks, and she listened attentively, impressed by how comfortable and natural he seemed. Everything about him appeared organized and intentional, as if he had rehearsed this moment to make it perfect for her. He took her to a boutique hotel located near a quiet street lined with cafes and trees. The lobby was small but elegant, filled with warm lights and soft music. Leonhart handled the check-in, then carried her bag to the elevator. He reminded her to rest first and promised to pick her up for dinner after she settled in. His tone was gentle but firm, giving her the sense that he cared about her well-being. But when she entered her room and the door closed behind her, a strange feeling rippled through her chest. The room was pristine, the bed neatly made, and the window revealed a clean view of the city skyline. Yet something felt slightly off. She couldn't name what it was. Maybe the way Leonhardt's eyes seemed to linger on her too long at the airport, or how carefully he controlled every step of the evening. She chalked it up to nerves and exhaustion. As she sank into the bed, she reminded herself that she was safe, that this was the beginning of a new life, and that she deserved happiness. She closed her eyes, unaware that the discomfort she pushed aside was the first warning sign of the danger she had just stepped into. Marizel woke the next morning feeling refreshed, but a faint uneasiness lingered beneath her excitement. The city outside her window looked bright and orderly, a place where everything seemed to move with purpose. She convinced herself that her anxiety came from being in a foreign country alone, not from anything truly dangerous. After getting dressed carefully, she waited in the lobby where Leonhart soon arrived, greeting her with a composed expression that never seemed to change. His calm demeanor impressed her, yet she noticed how his eyes scanned the room, as if checking who might be watching. They spent the early afternoon visiting well-known spots in the city. Leonhart guided her through clean streets, pointing at buildings and sharing bits of information about the places they passed. Yet he kept their routes controlled. When Marizel suggested detouring to a nearby store or exploring a crowded shopping area, he gently redirected her, insisting they stick to the plan he had prepared. She didn't want to seem ungrateful, so she followed along, but the feeling of being guided more than accompanied grew stronger. During lunch, Leonhart chose a quiet cafe tucked into a corner where few people sat. The ambience was calm, almost too calm. Marizel ate slowly as she watched him through the corner of her eye. He smiled at all the right moments, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Still, she dismissed her doubts. She reminded herself that many men simply had reserved personalities. Her past relationships had been with loud, expressive people, so perhaps she was only unfamiliar with someone more controlled. As the day went on, she noticed another detail. Leonhart always kept his phone face down and on silent. When it vibrated, he would stop mid-sentence, place a hand over it, and excuse himself to check it out of her view. Each time he returned, he acted as if nothing had happened. Marizel tried not to overthink it, but the pattern repeated enough times to unsettle her. By evening, she felt physically tired but emotionally restless. She wanted to return to her hotel room to unwind, but Leonhart insisted they share a special dinner. He said he had planned something memorable for her second night, something to celebrate their meeting in person. His insistence made refusal difficult. She offered a small smile and tried to adjust her expectations. He drove her farther from the city, down roads that grew narrower and quieter. Neon lights faded behind them, replaced by dim street lamps and long shadows. Marizel watched the unfamiliar scenery pass through the window and tried to push away the growing tension in her chest. She told herself that Singapore was safe, that Leonhart knew the area well, and that he had no reason to harm her. She repeated these thoughts like a small chant in her mind, though they provided little comfort. When they arrived at the restaurant, she realized it was not the type of place tourists usually visited. The building looked old but well-kept, with minimal signage and very few customers. Inside, the air smelled faintly of spices and disinfectant. The staff barely spoke and moved with a practiced efficiency that reminded her of a medical clinic more than a dining space. She sat down across from Leonhart, her hands folded in her lap to hide the subtle trembling. The meal was quiet. Leonhart seemed distracted, checking his watch multiple times. The food tasted fine, but Marizel's appetite had vanished. She felt a wave of dizziness come and go, which she tried to blame on fatigue. She had been awake since early morning, surrounded by unfamiliar faces and sounds. Perhaps her body was overwhelmed. She reached for her glass of water, but paused. The surface of the liquid reflected the dim lights above, and something about its clarity struck her as odd, though she couldn't explain why. Leonhart encouraged her to eat more, placing additional servings on her plate with careful movements. She nodded politely, but barely touched them. She noticed his gaze fixing on her each time she lifted a fork. His attention felt heavy, like a weight pressing on her chest. When she shifted uncomfortably, he adjusted his posture, almost mirroring her movements. As the meal progressed, her dizziness intensified. A warm, sluggish feeling spread through her limbs, making her breathing feel deeper and slower. She blinked hard to clear her vision, but the room already seemed to tilt slightly. She reached for her bag, intending to stand and excuse herself, but her fingers felt weak, as if they no longer belonged to her. Leonhart remained silent, observing her with an expression she could not read. His calm in the midst of her growing discomfort frightened her. She attempted to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. She felt her body losing its sense of balance. The clinking of plates, once sharp and ordinary, began to sound distant, like echoes underwater. Her last clear moment came when a woman entered the restaurant's side door wearing what appeared to be a medical coat. She walked toward her table with a confident stride, her eyes fixed on Marizel. Something about her presence sent a jolt of terror through her slowly weakening chest. She wanted to stand, scream, or run, but her body refused to respond. Her pulse throbbed loudly in her ears. The room dimmed, narrowing into a tunnel of blurred light. The woman in the coat reached for her arm, and Leonhart watched without concern, his expression unchanged. In that instant, Marizel understood that something terrible was happening, something she had been too hopeful to see coming. Everything faded into darkness before she could make sense of it. Marizel regained consciousness slowly, as if rising through thick layers of fog. Her eyelids felt heavy, and her mind struggled to form a single clear thought. When she finally opened her eyes, the first thing she noticed was the ceiling, a dull gray surface with peeling paint and stains the color of rust. She tried to move, but a sharp, burning pain shot through her lower back, forcing her to freeze. The sensation was unlike anything she had felt before, deep, raw, and terrifyingly unfamiliar. She lay on a metal bed covered with thin, rough sheets that scratched her skin. The mattress beneath her was hard, offering no comfort. A faint, cold breeze seeped through cracks in the walls, carrying with it a strange mixture of chemical disinfectant and something metallic. Her heartbeat quickened as her senses sharpened. Panic crawled into her chest. She touched her side with trembling fingertips and felt thick bandages wrapped tightly around her skin. The area was swollen and tender. She lifted her hand away and stared at her fingertips, shocked to see smudges of dried blood. Her breath became shallow as she pieced together the horrifying reality. She had undergone some kind of surgery, a surgery she never consented to, a surgery she did not remember. She attempted to sit up, but her body refused to cooperate. The pain intensified, radiating upward into her ribcage. She gritted her teeth and tried again, inch by inch, using the cold metal rail of the bed to help pull herself upright. Every movement felt like fire tearing through her side. She managed to sit halfway before collapsing back, exhausted and terrified. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for answers or at least a sign that someone might help her. The room was small and windowless except for a narrow opening near the ceiling covered with steel bars. A single flickering bulb hung from a crooked wire, casting sickly yellow light across the space. The walls were stained, scratched, and covered with patches where paint had peeled away. A bucket sat in the corner, along with a small table holding medical supplies, scissors, syringes, sticky tape, and used gloves. The sight made her stomach twist. Fear settled over her like a cold blanket. She tried to recall everything that had happened before she lost consciousness. The quiet restaurant, the food she barely ate, the dizziness, the woman in the medical coat.
Leonhart's calm, unreadable face. It all came rushing back in broken fragments, each one sharpening the dread that now filled her. She reached shakily for the edge of the bed and tried again to pull herself upright. This time she succeeded, though the effort drained nearly all her strength. She placed her feet slowly on the floor, wincing at the cold concrete, and used the wall for support. Standing felt like an accomplishment, but her body trembled uncontrollably. She limped toward the door, which appeared to be made of thick metal with a small rectangular slot at eye level. She tried the handle, but it didn't budge. She knocked weakly, but the sound barely echoed in the cramped space. She pressed her ear against the door and listened. Silence stretched on, heavy and unsettling. Then, faint footsteps approached from the other side. The lock clicked. The door opened just enough for a man to step inside. He was tall and lean, wearing a dark jacket and a mask that covered his face. His eyes showed no emotion, only a cold detachment. He looked at her briefly, then shifted his attention to the bandages on her side. Without saying a word, he examined them, pressing lightly to check the wound. The pressure made her gasp in pain. He didn't respond. He simply adjusted the bandage slightly, checked her pulse with clinical efficiency, then turned to leave. She reached out weakly, trying to gesture for help, but the man ignored her completely. The door shut behind him with a heavy thud, and the lock slid back into place. Marizel sank to the floor, her body trembling with fear and helplessness. Tears blurred her vision, but she quickly wiped them away. She couldn't afford to fall apart. She needed to think. She needed to survive. She crawled back to the bed and forced herself to breathe slowly, calming the panic rising in her chest. She tried to piece together what had happened. The dizziness at the restaurant wasn't natural. She had been drugged. The woman in the coat wasn't a doctor there to help. She was part of something much darker. And Leonhart, if that was even his real name, was involved. The realization hit her like ice. Her kidney was gone. She had been taken for organ trafficking. The thought made her stomach churn. She imagined herself lying unconscious on a table while strangers cut into her body, treating her like a product instead of a person. She felt violated, powerless, and furious at all once. Hours passed with no sense of time. The bulb flickered sporadically, casting shifting shadows across the walls. She lay on the bed, unable to fully rest, her mind racing with fear and questions. How long had she been unconscious? How many people were involved? Would they take more from her? Would they kill her once she was no longer useful? Her breath grew shallow at the thought, but she didn't allow herself to break. She stared at the locked door, her pain slowly sharpening into determination. If she had survived once, she would fight to survive again. She didn't know when or how she would escape, but she clung to one truth. She was still alive. And as long as she was alive, there was still a chance. The days that followed blended together in Marizel's memory, like a long, dark smear of pain and confusion. She had no way of knowing whether it was morning or night. The single bulb overhead flickered inconsistently, giving her no sense of passing time. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but the fear of what might happen next was stronger. From time to time, someone slid a tray of food through the slot at the bottom of the door. The meals were bland, barely edible, and always accompanied by a small cup of water. She forced herself to eat just enough to survive, knowing her weakened body needed every bit of strength it could gather. Her wound throbbed constantly. Each step she took sent shockwaves of pain through her side, but staying still only made her feel stiff and vulnerable. She spent hours each day pacing slowly around the small room, her hand pressed against the bandage to keep pressure on the wound. At first, she did it out of desperation, to stay awake, to avoid falling into despair. But soon her pacing became something more calculated. With each slow step, she studied the room again and again, searching for anything she had missed that could help her escape. The window was too narrow to climb through, even if she could reach it. The metal door was thick, secured by a heavy lock on the outside. The walls were cracked but solid. The only thing that seemed to change was the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside. She began counting them, learning the rhythm of activity beyond her cell. There were shifts, momentary rushes of movement followed by long periods of stillness. At least 2 different men passed by her door daily. Sometimes they stopped to check on her, other times they simply walked past. On her 4th day, she assumed it was the 4th. The man with the cold eyes came to check her wound again. This time he brought fresh bandages and a small metal tray of supplies. Marizel watched every detail of his movements. He didn't speak, and she made no attempt to engage him. But she noticed something important. Each time he visited, he wore a set of keys clipped to his belt. She memorized the sound they made as he walked, the faint clinking that echoed just enough to distinguish it from other noises. That small detail planted a seed of hope in her mind. As the hours dragged on, she continued studying her environment. She noticed the timing of footsteps, the humming sound that followed the flickering of the light, the faint vibration of machinery from somewhere deeper in the building. It wasn't just a room, it was part of a larger structure, possibly a warehouse or an old industrial facility. She listened for patterns, for anything predictable. The opportunity she needed came during a storm. It started with distant thunder that rolled through the ceiling like a heavy drumbeat. Rain hammered against the roof, and the weak electrical system in the building began to struggle. The lights flickered more violently than usual, then steadied, then flickered again. She lay awake on her bed, sensing tension in the air. Storms had a way of disrupting routines, and disruptions could bring mistakes. Late into the night, though she couldn't be sure of the time, the footsteps outside her door grew hurried. Voices echoed faintly, sharp and urgent, though she couldn't make out the words. The building groaned under the pressure of the storm. Marizel sat up, adrenaline pushing against her exhaustion. She crawled off the bed and pressed her ear against the door. Then she heard it, the unmistakable click of the lock. But something was different this time. After the click, no one entered. The footsteps receded quickly down the hallway, as if someone had been called away in a rush. The storm boomed overhead, shaking the walls slightly. The lights flickered off, then on, then off again for several seconds. When it came back, Marizel realized she could still hear the metallic vibration of the lock. It had not fully latched. Her heart pounded. She pushed the door gently. It moved. Not far, barely an inch, but it moved. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. With her hands shaking, she pushed again, slower this time. The door creaked open just enough for her to slip through if she turned sideways. She braced herself, one hand gripping the wall and the other pressing against her aching wound, then squeezed through the narrow gap. The hallway outside was dimly lit and empty. Crates and equipment lined the walls, casting long shadows that pulsed with each flicker of the lights. She took a deep breath and began moving carefully, keeping her footsteps light. Every sound echoed in the cavernous corridor, so she paused often, listening for signs of movement. She reached the corner and peeked around it. Another hallway stretched ahead, this one leading toward a stairwell. The storm raged above, the thunder masking her breathing. She made her way to the stairs, each step pressing painfully into her wound. When she reached the bottom, She found a large room filled with stacked crates, metal shelves, and a loading dock door that rattled from the storm's force. She needed a hiding place, somewhere temporary until she could find a path out. She crawled behind a stack of wooden crates near the loading area, her body trembling. Rainwater dripped from a high leak in the ceiling, splashing onto the concrete floor. The sound provided a steady rhythm that hid the faint noise of her breathing. Moments later, a large truck backed into the loading dock, its engine rumbling loudly. The doors to the warehouse opened and workers stepped inside, shouting instructions over the storm. The truck driver remained seated, waiting. Marizel forced herself to move, crawling toward the undercarriage of the truck. Her fingers slipped on wet concrete, but she managed to slide beneath the vehicle just as the loading doors closed again. The truck shifted slightly as cargo was loaded, and Marizel held her breath, praying no one would look her way. When the engine roared to life again, her body tensed. The truck began to move, pulling away from the warehouse and carrying her into the stormy night. Hours, or maybe only minutes later, the truck stopped at a market distribution center. Workers gathered around, preparing to unload supplies. When one of them spotted her limp, trembling body under the truck, he shouted for help. She was pulled out carefully, her consciousness slipping again. But she had done it. She had escaped the place where she was never meant to survive. Marizel woke in a hospital bed surrounded by bright lights, clean sheets, and the steady beeping of medical machines. For a moment, she panicked, unsure if she had escaped one nightmare only to be placed in another. But the scent of antiseptic hair was different, fresh, not stale. The room was warm, not freezing, and the faces around her were alert, concerned, and clearly part of a legitimate medical team. When a nurse checked her pulse and adjusted her IV, Marizel felt a wave of relief wash over her. She was finally safe, or at least safer than she had been in days. Her physical recovery was slow. The surgical wound along her side made every movement painful. Doctors explained that the operation performed on her had been done without proper medical standards, and the fact she survived the procedure and the infection risk was remarkable. She drifted in and out of sleep, her body fighting to heal while her mind replayed memories she desperately wished she could forget. Authorities began visiting her once she was stable. They spoke gently, aware of her trauma, taking her statement in small portions so she would not become overwhelmed. They asked her to recount everything she remembered, from Leonhart's messages to the moment she crawled under the delivery truck. Speaking about it felt like tearing open fresh wounds, but Marizel forced herself to continue. She wanted justice. She wanted the truth exposed so no one else would suffer the same fate. Investigators worked quickly, tracing the details she provided. They discovered that Leonhart Vale did not exist. His photos were doctored, his profile fabricated, his messages carefully crafted. His true identity was a man named Aldren Kestrel, a recruiter for an underground organ trafficking syndicate known for targeting vulnerable individuals across Southeast Asia. He operated under multiple aliases, shifting identities like clothing so he could lure new victims without suspicion. Marizel's heart broke when she learned that she was not the first. Dozens of women, and some men, had fallen into this same trap. Many had disappeared without a trace. Some were found too late, their organs removed, their bodies left in isolated locations. Others were alive but permanently damaged, their identities erased in transit, lost in illegal clinics scattered around the region. The syndicate was highly organized, using encrypted communication, unregistered medical facilities, and bribed intermediaries to avoid detection. The building Marizel escaped from was eventually located, though by the time authorities raided it, the place had been stripped clean. Equipment was gone, files erased, rooms emptied. Only faint traces remained, stains on the floor, discarded packaging, medical gloves, that hinted at the horrors performed there. Investigators found hidden compartments where makeshift surgical tables had been stored. They uncovered ledgers with coded entries, suspected to be transaction records for organ sales. Even without the perpetrators present, the evidence was enough to reveal the scale of the operation. International agencies joined the investigation, coordinating efforts across borders. The story of Marizel's escape spread quickly among law enforcement circles, prompting urgent meetings and renewed pressure on countries to tighten measures against organ trafficking networks. Her bravery became a catalyst. What she survived forced governments to pay attention. But while the syndicate structure began to crumble, Aldren Kestrel himself remained elusive. He vanished before authorities could trace his last known movements. Surveillance footage showed him leaving Singapore days before Marizel's escape, carrying a suitcase and displaying the same detached composure he always had. Reports of sightings trickled in from Malaysia, then Thailand, then the Philippines, but each lead dissolved into nothing. His ability to disappear so effectively suggested he had been doing this for years. Meanwhile, Marizel's recovery continued. She was discharged into the care of social workers and placed in a safe environment until she regained enough strength to travel. They helped her obtain temporary documents, as her belongings, including her passport, had been stolen during her captivity. Counseling sessions began, offering her a space to speak, cry, and confront the trauma that lingered inside her like a dark shadow. Some days she felt strong, ready to rebuild. Other days she was overwhelmed with grief and anger. When she finally returned to the Philippines, her family embraced her with relief and sorrow. They had feared the worst when her messages stopped. News of her story reached local media, and while Marizel avoided most interviews, she agreed to help authorities design warning campaigns to protect other travelers. She knew firsthand how easily trust could be manipulated and how vulnerable people could fall prey to promises of love, opportunity, or escape. Her experience sparked widespread discussions about online safety, travel precautions, and the dark reality of organ trafficking. She became a quiet advocate for victims, sharing her story when it could help someone else stay safe. Each time she spoke, she reminded listeners that her survival was not just luck. It was the result of instinct, resilience, and a desperate will to live. Yet, even as her life slowly found rhythm again, one unresolved truth followed her everywhere. Aldren Kestrel was still out there. Authorities continued searching, and international alerts remained active, but he remained a ghost, moving silently, slipping through the cracks in the system, always one step ahead. Marizel learned to live with the uncertainty. She refused to let fear dominate her new life. Instead, she found strength in the knowledge that her escape had exposed a network that had operated in the shadows for years. Her story saved lives. Her voice had sparked change. And though justice was still incomplete, she carried a quiet resolve within her. She had survived something unimaginable, and she knew that as long as she continued telling her truth, the world would not easily forget what had been done to her. Her scar remained, a physical reminder of the horror she endured, but it also became a symbol of her determination. She had been targeted, deceived, and nearly destroyed, yet she emerged alive. And sometimes, survival itself was the most powerful form of justice.